Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, back with part 2 of the RPM rewrite. Last time, we dug into the details surrounding the inception of RPM, as well as poring over the first couple of characters and how the way they were written for both helped and hindered them. Now we'll continue that discussion as it pertains to the remainder of the cast before then discussing the season as a whole. And we'll start with Scott because I think handling him is fairly straightforward. As I've mentioned on several occasions now, Scott is an unlikable dick of a leader until he's not as much. And his transition to being more personable fits in neatly with us learning more about the circumstances surrounding his life and the relationships thereof. He's basically the version of Nick Russell that Mystic Force couldn't quite give us, in spite of Mystic Force's writing being even more insistent on Nick needing to settle into his place in all this. You could make the argument that taking the early edge off of Scott would make him more tolerable more immediately. But I think because of how Colonel Truman is involved in everything and how their dynamic works, it's hard to see that really functioning. The fact of the matter is that Colonel Truman is incorrect with many of his assertions. His ideas for protecting Corinth are exactly wrong for the situation this season finds itself in. But that having been said, we still very clearly understand why that is. So the only thing I see as improving that dynamic is Scott being more understanding of where his father is coming from. But, importantly, his frustrations still build up over time through increasingly forceful debates about the merits of venturing beyond the dome. And that's when Heroes Among Us happens, basically exactly as is, but made even stronger because of the path getting there. So now, it's even more clear, even without being outright stated, that Scott's actions could have resulted in another lost Truman. And the implied idea of the Rangers all needing to make it out of this alive and together would be the perfect way to build up to a crushing finale, which we'll get to. While we're here, let's briefly discuss the Colonel's corporals. Vasquez is pretty perfect as is. Their situation is insane, and all she ever does is what she can, even when she doesn't believe she can. However, if Hicks is going to be presented as not that, or put another way, the more savvy, more experienced right-hand man of the Colonel, then just have him, not be an idiot. Maybe he makes a few valid suggestions, or even sides of Scott on challenging his superior. Easy enough. So now, let's dig into the character of Dr. K. My major idea for her is also something I'll touch on with regards to Gem and Gemma, and naturally, it all revolves around Alphabet Soup. I genuinely think that this organization is easily among the most fiendish PR villains, even though it's understandably difficult to see them as such. So, my idea for rewriting Dr. K isn't necessarily changing much of what we see, but rather changing the motivations behind it. This would involve solidly cementing Alphabet Soup as the sketchy government organization that it is. Now, this doesn't bother Kate too much at first, because deadpan child prodigy is obviously not going to fit into many normal social circles. She belongs here. She's useful here. And the people who snatched her off the streets not only convince her of that, but also give the impression of genuinely caring about her and the work she's doing to quote-unquote improve the world. But then, in a plot twist inspired by the chapter Black Saga of Yu Yu Hakusho, she gets hit with a heavy, graphic dose of reality when she happens upon the death toll caused by her scientific breakthroughs. And now she realizes that Project Ranger is gonna be used in the exact same way, should she finish it. So, instead of creating Venjix solely to escape a confinement that suddenly looks a lot more like what it really is after her bone-chilling revelation, she creates Venjix to take down Alphabet Soup from the inside and escape with Gem and Gemma. That's not too different from how Venjix's creation originally plays out, but it does away with some of the less impactful elements of going outside for its own sake and being fake sick in exchange for something much more visceral. But here's the real kicker in terms of how RPM plays around with visual symbolism. This change would make it so that Doc K's initial reluctance to connect with people, or even show her face, is directly connected to Alphabet Soup, who both don't show their faces or connect to people for real. It essentially sacrifices some of Venjix's symbolic importance to give more weight to Dr. K's plight, because now she realizes that she ended up not being terribly different from the people who abducted her in the first place. This, instead of focusing on her becoming the same faceless machine that her greatest mistake also starts off as. You can see how either way would work, but my preference is digging more into Alphabet Soup because there was so much untapped potential there. And we don't really need to change too much about Venjix either, except to show the actual effect of his methodical plans to weaken the city bearing some fruits over time. Because if we're being given the tall task of buying into this city as being so much harder to breach compared to the rest of the world, then it helps to be meticulous with the details thereof. Gem and Gemma are pretty damn great, so there's really only two things you need to adjust even without a full-scale flashback episode. Firstly, if the idea is to be a more mature take on PR, then we need to commit to their clear psychosis. They build bombs and fight grinders with smiles on their faces in childlike wonderment, and they've also got the pure skills to back up that mentality, since both, but especially Gem, are hardly ever physically challenged by the threat of Venjix. So, the simple way to handle that is to put them in a situation where they really are in over their heads and have to actually pay for it. And not in the cutesy way they tried to do a little after their integration onto the team. I mean, put them in a situation like Dylan or Dr. K, where the horrible memories that led them to this stalled mental development come rushing back. Make them afraid, separate them forcibly, and let them deal with the harrowing feeling of not knowing if the other is alright. And make all of this build from the foundation of them being their normal, reckless selves. And secondly, when it's all said and done, allow Doc K and the twins to go on their own journey to discover the truth about Alphabet Soup. At that point, they would have and should have grown a lot from their experiences, but all three know that nothing will ever truly feel right until they fully understand not just who they are, but why they are, and where they came from. And one more small change that might make a world of difference is this. Make it so that Gem and Gemma's first on-screen appearance is reuniting with Dr. K, and then go into her backstory. Since we don't yet know enough about the twins to be caught up in the trio's heartfelt reunion, I'm thinking it might work better if Doc K's abnormal reaction to them is the first time we ever see them together, because now we can share in Ziggy's notable confusion, and then work backwards to explain why she's all of a sudden openly emotional. Dylan is a fairly straightforward character, even though there's a lot more to him than the brooding bad boy routine the show loves to poke fun at, and because of that, Dylan as presented doesn't actually need to be changed that much on the surface. He's the one pushing the team to become better, or think differently. This especially works with Ziggy, because their understated brotherhood is easily among the best dynamics in any season of Rangers. But I think the real complication with approaching this rewrite as it pertains to Dylan is this. The entire idea of him is the thing most muddled by the mid-season showrunner change, as we touched on in part 1. Which then begs the question, do we approach this from the perspective of what could have been, i.e., Dylan as the endgame gazillion planned for? Or do we make our adjustments from the lens of what actually happened? It's a tricky scenario because, on the one hand, there's a very clear explanation as to why the focal point of this season shares a lot in common with the focal point of another season. Chiplin needed to get things done and done fast, and defaulted to what he knew would work with regards to that general type of character. Love it or hate it, it's hard to blame him for it. But then on the other hand, it seems crazy that the plans for transitioning showrunners was so slapdash that regardless of the end result, there would always have been something that didn't quite fit into the foundation RPM had set. So my thought is this, why not both? I think the best way to express both Gazillion's vision for Dylan, as well as churn out a plot that Chip would have been able to handle in such a short turnaround, is to basically compromise. Set up Tanaya as the sister Dylan was always looking for, and then comes the real twist. Both of their memories were nothing more than Venjix programming. That would function as a follow-up to how Dylan's memories were fake just before Gem and Gemma joined the team. So now, both Dylan and Tanaya get tricked into believing they share a connection. This eventually leads to Dylan acting rashly enough to be captured by Venjix right as the virus has spread enough for Venjix to overtake him completely. And, just for good measure, Tanaya gets killed by controlled Dylan just after realizing she was never actually human. And now, the finale can run as is, except it's Dylan charging Corinth. So now the team has to come to the same realization that Summer had to in part 1 of this rewrite. Some people can't be saved. Even the ones worth saving, because the power of that idea wouldn't mean as much if it's solely applied to Summer's horrible parents. In closing, let's discuss RPM more broadly. Despite the often used tagline of best season ever to some, as with any season, I think it's important to look a little deeper and really get a sense of the good, the great, the not so good, and the confusing to the point of conflicted. RPM as a complete entity was built on an unstable foundation both before and after its inception. A lot of people were let go while production was still happening, the show itself was treated with apathy by those in charge of it, and it could never really settle on how ambitious it wanted to be. A plethora of factors contribute to what I'd say are some major flaws that go well beyond nitpicks. So while I certainly love a lot about what we got here, it's not quite as clean and clear of a narrative upgrade as some might have led themselves to believe. That's more of what Jungle Fury ended up being. But that's just the thing. Part of the charm of most Ranger seasons is the fact that it's never perfect, not on screen and certainly never behind it. I for one like it when a Ranger season wants to defy the expectations of its premise and venture into new territories. I've mentioned before that the versatility of this franchise is one of its best traits, but same as you'd get a character like Preston resolving years of parental drama in 22 minutes, you get a character like Summer basically doing the same thing except with even flimsier reasoning somehow. What I'm saying, if I'm saying anything at all, is that when Rangers aims high, you get great characters like Ziggy here, or Wes back in the Time Force days. But with that territory also comes the potential to flub bigger ideas too. And that's the thing with RPM specifically. Due to a variety of factors, it could never quite commit to being everything it wanted to be or could have been, both in storyline and in tonal consistency. And it's easy to grab the pitchforks and knives and stomp over to Chiplin or whoever oversaw this at the House of Mouse, but Gazillion made his fair share of mistakes too, even beyond what got him fired. And that's why we sense this odd push and pull of competing forces here. RPM wanted these Rangers to develop by way of very poignant backstories and arcs, but it also refused to be too realistic because that would mean dour and gloomy. But sometimes you need a bit of unadulterated doom and gloom to really appreciate when the sun shines through, because without that, you inevitably undercut how the characters mature and grow from those experiences. And even for as funny as so many of us think RPM is, they didn't always need the jokes, because sometimes those jokes undercut the tension and or the resolution of the bigger moments. RPM is a fascinating season, inside and out, and I'm sure that as a fandom, we'll be discussing their ideas, their characters, their plot points, and the execution thereof for years to come. Hell, we'll probably start up again soon with the Good Doctor and Colonel Truman coming back to Beast Morphers, and I look forward to seeing what kind of new discourse my ideas brings to the table. Whether you agree or disagree or stop paying attention halfway through, we may never run out of points to make and discussions to have as it pertains to a series this dense. And if you know anything about me, then you also know that this fact energizes me more than presenting any singular take, whether hot or not. So I guess the best question to pose to everyone here is this. If you could rewrite this season, shape it to convey your view of quality and engagement, how would you go about doing it? And on that note, I hand the pen to all of you. Hopefully I can get more videos out in a more timely manner as my real life starts to slow down just a little bit, but we'll see how that goes. And until then, thanks for watching.